Hello again and welcome. I'm Christiana from Chemspec Europe, and I'm happy to welcome back Dr. Charlotte Wiles, who will be presenting the next session, where the small modular flow plants are the opportunity for supply chain security post COVID-19. Charlotte will be answering some questions at the end of the session, so I do invite you to write your questions into the chat throughout the presentation, so we have ample time at the end to answer these. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thanks, Christiana. So following on from yesterday's presentation where we explored the use of continuous flow reactors for R&D all the way through to manufacturing, we're just going to touch today on some of the trends that we've seen in the last 8-9 months now in the opportunities that the technology could bring to supply chain security as we enter the post-COVID-19 world. And what we're seeing is dramatic increases in the number of people that are actually looking into this technology as a result of not being able to secure supply chains over the past year. So a little introduction to us, for those of you that don't know us. We're a scalable flow chemistry reactor company. We focus on the development of reactors for process intensification. And part of this is to deliver improved processes and industrial engineering skids. So we work with a range of partners from universities to industrial engineering companies, system integrators, in order to take processes from a lab scale through to whatever manufacturing scale is needed. So what we've seen specifically in the past decades is there's been interest in the use of continuous flow technology for R&D, piloting, manufacturing, and this has been across the board, fine chemical, specialty and API. But nothing as significant in terms of uptake as the interest as a result of changes in local regulations and the geopolitical landscape that we've seen in the last couple of years. So if we look specifically to regulation change in the East, in China, as the government started to crack down on how people were manufacturing nitrated products, for instance, we saw that start to impact supply chains around the world. Obviously, the political landscape's been quite frisky the last couple of years, and as a result of that, we've seen people pulling back manufacturing into their own country. The desire to do this has obviously always been much higher than the activity in the area, and what we've found is when you look into it, the cost of retooling in a country that's not been manufacturing for decades to reshore and having no workforce has led often to a bit of a slow action or no action after investigating whether to do this. But in the wake of what's happened under COVID-19, we've seen that the supply chain risks due to border closures, travel bans, industry shutdowns without warning and shipping restrictions has really pushed to the fore the importance of a secure supply chain and the ability to have local control over it. As a result of this, we are having a lot of high-level country discussions and also company discussions as to what the value is associated with reducing your risk versus doing nothing and sticking with the global manufacturing approach that we all currently have now. So if we look to border closures in particular, that obviously affects material release. You can't go in and inspect the production that's occurring in a different country. Immediate shutdowns mean material just simply isn't available for shipping because the factory has closed with little or no warning. And if you've manufactured but you have a shipping restriction, your inventory is tied up on a dock, and this also impacts your cash flow. So you can't get your material, but you also can't sell it on, and it just sits there. So we're seeing an awful lot of discussions in how we can overcome this with a new business model, and we see continuous reactors as part of that. So one of the most overwhelming things that I think we felt personally is how much the industry has rallied around together to minimize the impact of any supply chain risk that's come around as a result of factories being closed or borders being closed. So I think the industry has done for the common good the best it can, but now we're starting to look at what can be done in the future to prevent this from happening again. And at a government level and a block level, you see countries and continents looking at how they can best reduce their reliance on others as a means of critical material supply. So here's just a few news clips from the past few months. We've got EU looking at how they rely on drug imports for such a significant proportion of the APIs used locally. India is seeing an opportunity to bring back some of the manufacturing from China to be a stopgap between people bringing things all the way back to Europe and the US. And the US are really looking down this made in America route. And we're seeing an uptake in people looking at value-added chemistry steps all the way through to API for local manufacturing. So this brings a big change in the market and a big opportunity. And whilst people are looking at this deglobalization and localization, there's obviously problems with doing that. You can't do it overnight. So what we're seeing is the heavy reliance for many decades on other countries to manufacture means that a lot of European countries don't have the capabilities currently and the infrastructure available to manufacture these intermediates quickly at scale. I mentioned earlier also workforce. There is a need to train and develop a local skilled workforce in the new requirements. So this is something that's going to take time. Financial and time investment will need to occur for this to happen. So the opportunities with de-risking supply chains as a result of localized manufacture is that you're going to alleviate the risk of future geopolitical disturbances. Also, if we look towards weather impact, we can have hurricanes that wipe out regions. So this is not just a political thing, it can also be weather and environmentally impacted. It's an opportunity to push us towards just-in-time manufacturing and reduce the need for stockpiling and high inventory, but still having surge capacity built into that production scale approach. And it gives an opportunity to those countries that have a lack of existing infrastructure of pots and pans of the old batch approach. It gives the opportunity to now look at more environmentally sustainable techniques, look towards modular, continuous digitalization, all as an advantage as we head towards Industry 4.0. So a lack of infrastructure can also be seen as an opportunity. You don't have to develop routes using the old technology. You have an opportunity to bring in a new approach. And this is where we're looking. So for those of you that are not familiar, flow chemistry has a range of technical advantages. To go flow, companies often have a selection of these advantages in mind. Just to be clear, you don't get all of them with every chemical process, just to manage expectations. But you have to look at your particular case, what it is that you're trying to achieve. But in essence, you can look at the technologies giving you increased safety, the ability to use more extreme, intense processing conditions with an increased safety profile. Development time comes down. You have a small hold volume. You can optimize your reaction quickly, minimize your scale-up risk. So this can help when you are shifting from an existing infrastructure to a new one. We've got improved process control. This gives you the high degree of reproducibility that you need for consistent manufacture of high quality products. And it also gives you the ability to replicate. So if you have a process that runs in Ireland, you could look at putting a satellite production unit in Belgium and putting one over in the US. And if they're controlled in the same way, designed in the same way, you'll get the same production output. So this really lends itself to the localization approach. And we are looking at much smaller production units, which should be lower investment and lower operating costs. So as we see confidence in the technology growing, people are now developing directly in flow. We're not seeing always a batch to flow conversion. So this can give you additional speed to market impacts, lower investment costs and flexibility in the production volume. When you're first introducing a product into the market, it's always the holy grail question: how much material are you going to need to produce in 1 year, 5 year, 10 years time? And then you build your plan and design accordingly. With flow, you can leave the system running for longer or less time to influence how much material you produce. So you're much easier to ramp up or reduce production rate in order to see market demand changes. So we've said in the past years, there was a push to use flow chemistry. It was ramping in the past years, especially the last 2 to 3 years. However, these past few months, we've all seen across the market a huge acceleration in the interest in doing this and the demand to pull manufacturing back. And I think part of this in the past was due to real valuation was coming on lowest landed cost for your raw material, and producing in someone else's backyard was fine. The future now looks that there's a known value with resilience to your supply chain and a really strong desire to have local manufacturing control. And as a result of that, we're seeing a lot of activity at a government and regulatory level where people are targeting how do we control the critical raw material access. In the early, maybe 2-3 months of the pandemic, people were looking at the critical APIs, but we've seen now as we get further into this, even active intermediates and critical raw materials in pigment industries are becoming problematic. So across the board, this is looked at from a fine, specialty and pharma perspective. If you have a chemical manufacturing case, I think you can be considering localization. So governments are looking for faster pandemic responses and environmental impact response, and also the faster supply of an emerging technique and therapy. Faster drug approval means you can be manufacturing much quicker, and you may want to deploy that as a small unit in multiple territories to serve markets much quicker. As we head more towards personal medicine and development of personalized care products, this is obviously also something that will need flexible, small modular tooling in order to achieve. It will not be viable through world plants and large batch technologies. And across the board, of course, we're all trying to reduce the environmental impact of the chemistry that we're working on. So the shift from a world plant into a local production plant, we see small agile production units have a role to play in that. They're not the whole solution, but they are a key part. We're looking at capex reduction, as I said before, a move to on-demand manufacturing and work in progress, and much smaller production units compared to the batch infrastructure that you would be used to seeing. So on the right-hand side here, you can see a small graphic of a batch vessel alongside a rotating tube reactor image from AM Technology. And these units have the same annual output. So you can see dramatic infrastructure reduction and the ability to position this kind of equipment outside of a conventional factory environment. So I think I've made it clear, historically, it was a bit more of a challenge to make a business case for small production plants, but I do honestly see that COVID-19 has changed that conversation, and there's increased value on supply chain resilience being placed. So you can see here a few examples of plants. So these are picked from industry examples. You can see things from Zeton, Fluid. On the right, a piece of work that we've done together with the engineers at DSM in Austria. And what you can see is there's no one size fits all. You don't have a small box that arrives and this is what will produce your chemical, but there are common elements across the reactor platforms. You'll have dosing systems, you'll have reactor elements, and you'll have thermal control units and PET. The actual features that you pick are dependent on your process and how you assemble them. If it's a skid versus a wall-mounted unit will depend on whether or not you need the flexibility to reposition, reconfigure, or if this is a small dedicated plant. So as the technology is relatively new, people are looking for future flexibility, especially contract manufacturers. So you'll often find the contract manufacturers looking at a modular approach with a view that they could dismantle once they've manufactured one material, reassemble and produce something else. So what's incredibly important, and I'll show you in some of the case studies, is making sure that you leave sufficient capacity within that unit that you can ramp up and increase your production rate if that's going to be needed, or you replicate in order to duplicate productivity. So modularity is a key part of a flexible, small agile plant. And this is a university setup, but I'm using it just to give you an idea of the modularity that you need to be thinking of when you're going continuous. You need to be able to choose different dosing systems. So you can see here, there's a range of piston pumps, peristaltic pumps, gas dosing modules. You need a range of reactor types if you're looking at a broad range of reaction chemistry. So it could be 3D printed, could be actively mixed, like you see the ACR, or a plate reactor. You'll always need thermal control. This is typically a recirculating unit like a Lauda, Jalabo, Huber type installation. And then you can consider your downstream. Once you've made your product, what do you do with it? So you could have liquid-liquid separators, membrane separators from Zyput, or as you can see in the image here, there's a sink centrifugal separator for liquid-liquid separation. So what you're basically having is this theoretical toolbox where you draw upon the requirements for your chemistry. Do you have one gas feed, a liquid feed, a high energetic piece of chemistry? If so, then you'd pick a pump, a gas dosing module, a plate reactor, and a chiller. So by having these tools in your armory, you can rapidly configure what you need in order to develop that first pilot campaign and production proof of concept. When you get a bit further down the line and you're wanting to be manufacturing, you can see this gets more skid-based. This is an example from Fluid in the Netherlands. And what you have here on the left is a dosing skid. In the center, you can see the reactors, the thermal control unit. And then on the right, your workflow is that you'll be collecting your reaction product. So this is now going into, as you can see, a walk-in fume cupboard, all assembled off-site. This gives you really rapid commissioning because you can wheel in the parts, hook them up, and do your site acceptance test and your qualification. And this is an important example of future expansion capabilities. In the center, there's space left for an additional reactor for future growth. So this was already pre-considered, and you leave enough capacity in your pumps, and you leave the space in order to increase production capacity as and when it's needed. So this particular case was an increase in product selectivity of a gas liquid piece of chemistry, a 50% capex reduction, and the ability to rapidly increase productivity without changing the major elements of the setup. One of the earliest examples of industry and academia partnering was the F3 factory. This started in 2009 as a project, and it was a public-private sector initiative to look at the advantages that continuous manufacturing could bring to fine, specialty and pharma end users. And within this project, you can see that they've worked on a skid-based platform with a docking station. And by having these regular shaped skids for different reactors, different dosing aspects, you can really quickly reconfigure within what is a container-sized environment the production rates and the production type that you're doing within that environment. So across the board, I would encourage you to go and look at the Cordis Europa website. You'll get a feeling of the different types of processes they did, but you can see there was a general capex reduction and OPEX reduction, a dramatic footprint reduction when working in this way, and up to 30% energy reduced for the energetic chemistry that they were working on. Footprint was one of the biggest drivers after safety for the implementation of our technology. Very compact, small, intense units. And we're seeing in countries where land is particularly expensive for expansion in scientific belts and in production areas, that the use of flow is used as a strategic advantage to increase production capacity without having to expand sites. So this is a case from a customer of ours, Anthem Biosciences in India, and they were rapidly expanding as a company. You can see from 2007 all the way through to 2011, huge increase in total reactor capacity. At that point, 5 acres of land was consumed. They had to expand to 15 acres, and that gave them a dramatic increase again in the kiloliters of vessel capacity available. But as the market demand carried on increasing, can you realistically carry on increasing the footprint of your plant when you're at the boundaries of the environment that you're working in? So as part of this, in 2017, they started to look strategically about intensifying processes and better use of space within the existing production plant. And this allowed them to have a higher productivity, better vessel capacity usage. As a CDMO, that's incredibly important. Reduce cycle times of projects from conception to delivery, and a dramatic environmental impact, a reduction in effluent of almost tenfold. So safety and energy profile have been really the backbone of this technology for the past few years. And this is a nice case study from Michael Nonamaker at Evonik. You can hear more in the, if you follow the link at the bottom of the slide of his presentation. But I selected this example because it shows you the dramatic improvements you can have in energy consumption when you're looking at using a flow process versus a batch. So here in the table, you can see that we've compared plant footprint, energy consumption, and CO2 reduction as a result of going from a cryogenic -70 batch process into a -20 degree continuous flow process. So the assumptions made for the calculations are that the selectivity you require are achieved still at the higher temperature. And this is a common phenomena that we see in flow. You can really increase the temperature for cryogenic processes and keep the product selectivity very high. These are, generally speaking, very fast reactions that are controlled well within continuous. And as a result of bringing up the temperature, you're already making energy savings. The smaller footprint and the lower heat loss from a flow reactor has increased benefits. So what you see is footprint goes down again 90%, energy reduction and CO2 down by 83%. And that's as a result of switching to a smaller footprint, continuously recirculated fluid cooled reactor, as opposed to liquid nitrogen. So when you're looking at using this technology, you really have to look at where you can have the benefits in the total process. It's not just about the reaction, it's about the environmental impact, it's about the cost of goods, it's about the raw material use. But the one thing you have to take really good care of is process control. So your reactor is running now with seconds to minutes reaction time. So you cannot be offline analyzing to see if your material quality is good like you would in batch. So we typically use a lot of PAT in order to ensure that we're operating in a high area of understanding and a high degree of process control. And it's the combination of these that gives you a robust, reproducible, well-performing flow reactor. It also means that a highly automated system results, and this reduces your reliance on manpower. Also been shown to be a problem during the pandemic. You need to reduce the number of people that are in your factory at any one time. So these small units being remote operated is an advantage if you're looking to reduce the number of people in contact with the product that you're generating. And if you can operate this remotely, you can also replicate and have the same product quality in different areas. Due to the importance of this and sometimes the bottleneck with people understanding how to engage with machine learning and continuous platforms, we've started working together in a project called Conopt with Perceptive Engineering. And the goal here is that we'll couple the advantages of continuous with advanced process control, but giving the, giving the user a graphical user interface that is appropriate for the chemist doing the R&D work, overcoming some of the perceived challenges with how to get started with machine learning. So compact footprint wise, we're typically looking at systems that are fitting within fume cupboards, fitting within industrial elevators, and you're developing these small controllable units that can be used to deliver multi-metric ton quantities of material. So process safety, process quality are the key drivers here. If you look towards the benefits of intensifying a process and going more direct in terms of reaction steps, you can see a lot of generation 2 work going on in the pharma industry. Here, a case by Fluid and Merck. You can see between batch generation 1, flow generation 2, reduction in number of reaction steps. This obviously improves your process mass intensity. It increases your yield and dramatically reduces your cost of goods. You've also got the ability to real-time release in the future. So these are small systems that are able to give you these improvements if you develop alongside your first generation process. I showed this example yesterday, a series of small modules that are built together in order to give the CDMO, Ajinomoto, Omnichem, the flexibility to react to market changes. So here you can see they select the number of pump skids required, number of reactors, and with that automated platform, they're able to produce the material for their customer. Initially, safety driver for a highly energetic piece of chemistry. Technically, the advantage of this is that you can qualify those individual units and then put them together off-site in your production environment without making any changes for scale up, simply leaving it running for longer. So I think there is a really strong future for continuous manufacturing, process intensification, and whilst the pandemic has had devastating effects around the world, it is giving us an opportunity to look at how we're working and see if we have the potential to disrupt conventional supply chains to bring benefit and value to countries and companies at a local level. It is going to be important that we combine process analytical tooling with flexible manufacturing so that we can robustly control what's happening locally in these units. But if you can produce it in one location, you can replicate and quickly deploy in others. So this gives huge flexibility and potential. So industrial continuous scale manufacturing, it's not new. It's been used for decades and centuries in the oil and gas industry, food industries with really tight product spec, high regulation, low margins. But the difference we're seeing now is continuous manufacturing being used for traditionally lower volume, higher value products. And this means you have the intensification argument against the business advantages of small, flexible, just-in-time manufacturing. So we see the technology has advantages to bring. It's not a solution, as I say, to all problems, but it's definitely, we're seeing a stark contrast in the old style approach where stockpiles were required. Transport restrictions are really highlighting that this is not the solution and that you need to be manufacturing close to the point of use. So this is obviously not a technique that any one company delivers alone. We partner with a number of engineering companies and solution providers to find the right mix of reactor, process, and engineering. So I would encourage you to, if you don't get a chance to ask questions now, get in touch with us and we'd be happy to pass you through our network in order to achieve what you're looking for redeveloping and reshoring your chemical process. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions if there are any, Christiana.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Yes, we have a couple. You mentioned centrifugal phase separators for MRT. Which company would be offering this equipment for lab scale?
Oh, well, it's going to depend on what your concept of lab scale is. So if you're developing a relatively large process, company CINC from Germany would be able to help you with that. If it's an incredibly small scale, there's some prototype developments out there. I'd be happy to contact the person with the question to get a feeling of what they're needing and give them some advice offline. But it's going to depend on the size of production rate that you're going for at the lab. If you're looking at very small scale, I would suggest going for liquid-liquid membrane separators. You can be as low as a few 10 mil, 1 mil per minute. So that will let you do your testing work at the lab scale quite conveniently.
Okay, excellent. Well, Charlotte is on the platform, so if you would like to make contact with her as part of Chemspec Digital, you would be able to make contact with her there. We do have time for one more question. Do the regulators support the use of continuous manufacturing, or do they prefer the batch processes?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So initially, we saw the interest in the technology from the pharma sector. And of course, as you get through to route scouting, phase 1, phase 2, you have to consider whether or not the regulatory bodies are going to accept this new way of working. And fortunately, the US FDA in particular have been incredibly vocal about their support for this technique. So you can also look on our website for downloads on this. There's new guidances coming in. ICH Q13 is in development for how to go about using continuous manufacturing, but there are some advanced guidances and draft guidances available. So they're very supportive. For them, it's about the quality of the product. If you're making a high quality product and you can control it, they're not bothered if it's a batch process or a continuous. So people shouldn't be worried about whether or not it wouldn't get approved because it's a continuous process. There's no backup of a batch process required.
Excellent. Thank you. I hope that answers your questions. I think that's all we've got time for at this moment in time. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Really appreciate your time and
Thank
your
you.
for your presentation. Thank you all for watching.